Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center's Transition Trailblazers series. My name is Randy Bell, and I'm the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. We're extremely excited to be partnering with Uniper to launch this new series, a flagship forum for global energy leaders to discuss key energy transition challenges and opportunities at a time when the impacts of climate change are being felt around the world. With this series, we envision a platform where policymakers, leading energy innovators, business leaders can develop and amplify the right energy policy solutions to drive the global energy transition. In this first edition, we're thrilled to feature Senator Coons and Senator Braun, though unfortunately Senator Braun has been called into a markup and so is running late. We hope he's able to join us and be part of the conversation later on. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce Mark Merrill, who is the president and CEO of Uniper North America. Mark has an impressive background in the energy sector, including over 8 years at Uniper and over 3 years at E.ON, before Uniper was spun off as a separate company. And he has a JD from Louisiana State University. So Mark, wonderful to see you. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. It is a pleasure to host you here. Why did Uniper find it so important to support this initiative?
Well, Randy, thank you very much. It's also my pleasure to be here today and to play a small part in the Atlantic Council's continuing good work on the energy transition. You know, the Council's commitment to driving constructive debate on the critical issues we're facing today is certainly commendable. You know, Uniper is particularly pleased to be supporting this series because it provides a forum where the industry can hear from leaders that are in a unique position to share their policy, to shape policy and regulatory frameworks so necessary to drive the sustainable change that we're all working towards. You know, today's particular program focuses on the legislative perspective in the United States with two, leaders of the Senate, both of whom have a history of pursuing practical, innovative solutions in the energy sector. And I'm particularly looking forward to the conversation. You know, the energy transition is a challenge like the world has never seen, but it's also an opportunity like no other. You know, to be successful, it'll take innovation, hard work, and collaboration. And that's collaboration across industries, across borders, and between the private sector and the public sector. You know, our hope is that this discussion in this series will help underscore the importance of that collaboration and ultimately support the development of a comprehensive public policy framework for achieving, a sustainable, effective energy transition. You know, we think that's critical. And I say that from a perspective of someone, who started his career in 2010 in Germany, right when they were kicking off their energy transition, the Energiewende. By way of context, Uniper is a global company that generates, trades, and markets energy on an international scale. We are among the world's largest generators of power with over 35 gigawatts of installed capacity, and one of Europe's and the world's largest traders of energy commodities, particularly natural gas, LNG, and electricity. Uniper itself is an interesting story and particularly relevant to today's discussion, I believe. We came into being as a spin-off of one of the largest integrated utilities in the world. And our portfolio clearly, although it's diversified, is heavy on fossil fuels, thermal generation, an extensive gas midstream business, as well as a large global commodity segment. Therefore, from the very beginning in 2016, when we spun off, decarbonization and the energy transition were necessarily central factors in how we positioned ourselves. It's critical for us to understand the political, regulatory, and policy frameworks being implemented across Europe and the various countries across Europe, because the impact of those frameworks are clearly felt in our markets and in our business operations. So like for many companies, these frameworks, this policy, it's at the core of how our business needs to adapt going forward and how we plan for the future. Since that time, our company is committed to our European generation activities being carbon neutral by 2035, and the entire group being carbon neutral by 2050. Along the way, we've made also the interim goal of targeting a 50% reduction in our emissions in our European generation by 2030, based on 2019 levels. Right now, the company's focused on how the business can do three things. It's decarbonize our operations in line with the Paris Agreement, ensuring, which has always been important to Uniper, the security of supply to meet our current and future demand and be that facilitator of the energy transition, while at the same time maintaining efficiency in the cost of energy. Now, it's not just in Europe we're active, and that's why I'm here. We're also looking to take that experience in decarbonization and the energy transition and bring it constructively into other regions, particularly the US and North America, where organizations we've found across all sectors are coming under growing pressure to make their operations more sustainable and climate friendly. And we think these organizations could use a helping hand and an experienced hand. And therefore, whether they're communities, large sector, private sector organizations, or utilities, they need somebody with our expertise, and we think we're there and ready to help. And it's extremely interesting business opportunity. For example, we have a growing portfolio of renewable sourced power purchase agreements where we can market renewable energy and facilitate the creation of more renewable generation in North America. Additionally, we have service offerings in energy management and energy services for solar, wind, and battery facilities, not to mention many conversations on hydrogen. We think, in Europe, we're well on our way, but we think that the transition is happening here too, and we'd like to participate both in the business aspects of it, but also the policy discussions that are so important to the business. Thus, we're heartened to see a pragmatic discussion on that front happening here in the United States. And we welcome the opportunity to work with the Atlantic Council on programs that can help stimulate progress in an area that's so important to the private sector in the industry here. So with that, Randy, I'll turn it back to you.
Mark, thank you. We have a couple of minutes until Senator Coons arrives. So I have a few questions for you, just based on some of the things you just said. First of all, you noted that your European business will be carbon neutral by, I think you said 2035, with the whole business globally by 2050. Now, about a fifth of the world's energy companies the world's largest companies have committed to net zero targets, but there's a lot of lack of clarity around how you achieve these goals and how you actually define carbon neutral or net zero. So how do you approach these decarbonization targets that you've set so clearly? How do you think through how you're going to get there, but also what do you exactly mean by carbon neutral?
Well, carbon neutral means carbon neutral. It doesn't mean eliminating all carbon emissions, obviously, but we're working together with our partners across the industry, but also in non-governmental organizations to better define what that actually means. Because on the way up here, I was reading about and you're aware how many companies have set these targets, particularly over the last 12 months. And I think there is a need across the industry to actually make those uniform and have some standardization across that. But like I said, with Uniper, our goal is to make that European generation portfolio carbon neutral by 2035. And that means a lot. That means shutting down certain assets, but that also means participating in other markets and growing more of our carbon neutral generation, But I think it's a strong commitment that we've made. It's ambitious, but it's realistic, but also necessary.
Really fascinating. Now, it's particularly impressive to be making this pledge as essentially, as you said, the fossil fuel heavy spinoff of E.ON. How did Uniper come to make this pledge, given its background, given that it was sort of seen as where the harder assets are put off to the side and sort of thought maybe it'll just go away? How did you think through that challenge and really approach it so head on?
Well, you're very correct. I mean, I remember back in those days in 2016, as we were approaching the IPO and the spinoff, there was the talk of Uniper representing the old energy world and being even a bad bank of the energy world. We knew better, I think, and I think the market realized that as well, that, we, even at the time of the spinoff, played an essential role in the energy transition. We have those highly flexible gas assets that keep the lights on. We have that global gas midstream business and storage assets that maintain system stability. Now, clearly, without having any renewable assets, we realized very early on that we also need to pivot and to transition away. And we started that process from the very beginning. And so now we'll be looking for new opportunities and are looking for new opportunities, and actually at the forefront of many of these opportunities, whether it be in hydrogen, renewable development, or providing services to the energy transition. We have the experience over 100 years. Uniper was started in 2016, but it's based on 100 years of experience of our predecessor companies. So, yeah, we are ready to pivot, and we've began to pivot But we're also very proud of where we come from and proud of the role we continue and will continue to play in security supply going forward, particularly in the next few years as we move in this energy transition.
Got it. Now you talked a bit about policy and the importance of clarity and certainty to enable you to respond and enable businesses to respond. So what are since we're talking about in the United States today, what are some of the bipartisan and common ground climate solutions that are important to your business and the private sector writ large so that you have clarity and can make the right investments to get where we need to go?
Well, I think, Randy, at the beginning, I did talk about collaboration, and then, in some of the notes with respect to this session, we talked about, common ground solutions, and I think that's important. I think having and the reason is because, in my opinion, common ground solutions are sustainable. They're not subject to the whim of changing administrations or executive orders. We need, particularly in this area, in this space where we make investment decisions, long-term investment decisions, we're investing hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, you need certainty in that area. So you may not always get exactly what you want, but that if both sides are signing on to it and compromising and passing substantial legislation, that you can trust that and make those types of substantial investment decisions that are needed to be successful in this energy transition, based on that common understanding.
Got it. Well, let's hope that we can talk about some of those common ground solutions later today. But in the meantime, you're pressing forward. Uniper is moving to net zero, whether or not the U.S. and other jurisdictions keep up. So, what do you see as the kind of competitive advantage that a company like Uniper, other energy companies can gain by being at the forefront of this conversation instead of sort of following the regulations? Is there a first mover advantage?
Yeah, I think there's always a first mover advantage. But I think what's really particularly important in in this particular situation is that companies continue to be innovative and get out ahead of the curve on being a problem solver in this area and a solution provider. And I think that's where we as Uniper have a distinct advantage. It's the companies you can wither on the vine and just slowly decrease your business. That there are companies who are doing that and will continue to play the role they're playing until they're not permitted to anymore. Or you can be out front and innovative and come up with creative solutions and help others get to those decarbonization goals and get to those sustainable goals that we're all shooting for. And I think that's how you become a front runner. You be innovative in the products you serve, in the products you provide, the solutions you offer to your customers, and you expand your business because many say this is the investment opportunity of a lifetime, the energy transition, and we believe that. We are very optimistic and think that we want to be a leader in this space.
Got it. I'm getting notes in the chat that Senator Braun is on his way. So we're going to pivot very quickly as soon as he's here. I think Senator Coons is on his way as well. And I think Senator Braun, I'm hearing, has 10 minutes, given that there's a lot going on in the Senate this week. Hurts little something about that. But I do know that we're going to have Senator Braun. So just be prepared for a very quick pivot here. I do want to go one more question.
Am I muted?
Which is, Uniper is...
Senator Braun, I'm actually here if... because both of us are straddling a very tricky dynamic of a couple votes and some committee markups. There's Chris as well.
When I said a very quick pivot, I meant a very quick pivot. So welcome Senator Braun and Senator Coons. It's such a pleasure to have you here at the Atlantic Council virtually for the inaugural Transition Trailblazers series. I want to turn it over to the moderator for this segment with the two of you, which is Julia Neshwat, who is distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council and has a storied career, bipartisan career as a diplomat, as a military officer, and as a leading energy thinker. So Julia, over to you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Randy, very much. And thank you, Senator Braun and Coons for joining. I imagine your schedule is just nonstop. I'll just get right to it if that's okay. It's certainly an exciting time when it comes to bipartisan work, and we don't always see that in the media. So again, thank you for being here and leading the charge, especially on issues such as climate and clean energy. Let me just go ahead and begin with, for both of you, just opening it up to where you see the greatest opportunities for bipartisan work when it comes to reducing emissions. And with that, are there any areas or sectors across the energy field where you think has the most potential?
I'll let Senator Braun go first if I might, because I think he's under a little more time pressure than I am. Mike?
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I do have a committee markup that's mixed in with a sequence of votes. So number one, I like what I heard as I was eavesdropping here before Chris got on, is trailblazing and kind of setting the stage. We've done so much in literally about 2 years of a Senate climate caucus. We've had untold numbers of industry leaders. And what I'd like to stress mostly, I've been involved in this because I've been a conservationist my entire life. I've trailblazed on conservation from the time I kind of knew what the word was. And when Chris asked me to join the climate caucus, it was an easy yes. We've come so far, and I want to focus on my side of the aisle. Chris has not had to do much convincing on his side, and I think that's where the tricky balance on what can work in a bipartisan way. I'm bringing some of my members out of the denial kind of phase to where they were not interested in having the word climate in the conversation. We did pass the first piece of legislation just recently out of the Senate that ended up passing 92-8. So that is amazing. And I think there's been, what I want to stress in the time that I've got is we've moved at a very quick speed for what Chris would know is not an institution that gallops along on hardly anything when it comes to devising legislation, changing thought, and especially how polarized it was between my side of the aisle and the other. And we've already, I think, accomplished the most difficult part of it. We've got 7 senators on each side in a Senate caucus. We've talked to just dozens of industry leaders that impress me that they want to be part of the solution, not dragging their feet like the other thing I work hard on, which is reforming healthcare. That is like pulling teeth. A lot of good things occurring, and we're finally getting over that kind of denial stage, or I'm not interested, or my answer is no on my side of the aisle. So that is what pleases me in terms of what can happen from here forward.
Thank you. And Senator Coons, please.
If I might, I'll first just agree with my co-chair of the Climate Solutions Caucus that in the environment that was here in the Senate a few years ago, just getting 14 senators of both parties to agree that the climate is changing, that human activity is causing it, and that we have to take action to address it is a step forward. Mike's being, I think, a little humble there. Let me just give him credit, along with the chair of the Agriculture Committee, Debbie Stabenow, for getting a bill called Growing Climate Solutions, not just out of the Agriculture Committee, not just to the floor of the Senate, but passed by an overwhelming bipartisan vote. So your question to us, Julia, what technologies and what areas do I think there is some promise for bipartisanship? Natural solutions, like the Trillion Trees bill or the Growing Climate Solutions bill, advanced nuclear, carbon capture and sequestration, and energy efficiency are all areas where I think we've seen legislative action. At the end of last year, there was an Energy Policy Act of 2020 that was signed into law. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there's investment in a number of these areas. Senator Cassidy and I co-sponsored the SCALE Act, which would expand financing for carbon dioxide pipelines. And I think there's real promise. There's funding as well as authorization for expanding both basic and applied research, demonstration, and then utility scale work across those 4 different areas in bills that I think we're going to see at the president's desk soon.
Fantastic. Thank you for also raising the bipartisan infrastructure bill. As you can imagine, the world's been watching and where that's going. You mentioned the SCALE Act, and again, a lot of great potential, particularly with the specific investment opportunities to help expedite that decarbonization. Let me turn it to the private sector needs, if we can, real quickly. You heard maybe early, some of you, Mark from Uniper, talk about the need for certainty and clarity when it comes to carbon regulations in order to really try to adjust its operations for a low carbon future. What do you think certain, reliable, durable climate solutions could look like, particularly for the business community, what they should be aware of, in particular, when you think about the horizon of policy making? Is there anything that we could share for them?
Well, Julia, let me see if this answer is responsive, and then correct me if it's not. One of the things that Mike's really been struck by, Senator Braun's been struck by, is how many of the business leaders our Climate Solutions Caucus have met with over the past year and a half, nearly 2 years now, have said they want regulatory certainty and a price on carbon. We've had more than 24 meetings with CEOs of Fortune 50 companies, trade associations, as well as organizations and analysts. And overwhelmingly, the private sector leaders we've met with, from oil and gas companies to cement and steel companies to automobile companies, have said, put a price on carbon, give us a clear path, an escalator that allows us to model what that price is going to be under all conditions, and then give us some regulatory certainty, and we can make dramatic strides towards reducing our carbon footprint, reducing emissions, and investing in and bringing to scale new technologies. So I do think the most important thing we could do is to put a price on carbon. A number of us have discussed and debated what that would look like, what mix there would be between new revenue to the government that would be rebated to families who would be paying increased costs versus what revenue would be used for either environmental justice or community adaptation or the deployment of new technologies. But before we get to that, I've introduced a bill, there's a companion in the House, that would begin the process of creating a border carbon adjustment. That's because our close neighbor and ally, Canada, as well as our partners in Europe, in the EU, and in the UK, are all moving towards a border carbon adjustment. And in talking to members of the administration and members of the caucus and my colleagues in the Senate, as well as business leaders, it seems that we may actually be able to move first to assessing what the regulatory price already is on carbon in our economy and setting a border carbon adjustment that facilitates our coming together with those closest allies I just referenced and putting up an additional cost barrier to high carbon intensity, lower cost products like steel coming from China. The version of that bill I've drafted would initially only apply to some of the highest carbon intensity and easiest to measure industrial sectors like cement and steel, but could allow, over the next 2 years, could allow the work to be done and the framework to be established to align us with our closest allies in a way that would put further pressure on China and India, Indonesia, and others to be more bold in their climate action. Julia, I hope I'm answering your question.
Yes, thank you so much. And I understand Senator Braun had to take off. So Senator Coons, we'll continue on with you if that's okay. So yes, so thank you. You mentioned the border carbon adjustment with the Fair Transition and Competition Act of 2021. And it's interesting to see Europe is also evaluating this. I think Israel is now also exploring as well as we lead the way. So with this adjustment, from what you're saying, it could help reduce tensions and maybe potentially avoid potential trade disputes, particularly around the European carbon border as a mechanism. Is there anything more that you could say to that or elaborate on what you think the implications could be?
Julia, I'll just mention that trade in the last 20 years really got stuck in a particular, I think, backwards looking view at NAFTA and a number of international trade deals from the 90s. And as long as we're talking about trade really solely as a zero net sum competition about the chickens and soybeans and cars and air conditioners and who's manufacturing what and who's losing what jobs, there's a robust amount of Americans on both the right and left folks represented by both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primaries, who are opposed to any more international trade deals. And if that's the ground on which we have our next discussions about trade, I suspect the outcome will be the same, that there will be broad opposition to our entering into any sort of trade deals. But if we look at a trade deal that instead is about making American manufacturing and American industry more competitive, price competitive, and lining up with our closest democratic partners, UK, EU, Canada, perhaps also Australia, South Korea, Japan, even Mexico, we're reinforcing the USMCA, we're reinforcing modern standards in terms of labor and the environment, and we're taking on climate change. In our group of 14 senators, this Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus, one of the concerns most often raised by my Republican colleagues is that if we put a price on carbon, if we put in a clean electricity standard, if we put in greater regulatory pressure on carbon emissions here in the United States, carbon leakage is the biggest problem. China and India will simply continue to build new coal-fired power plants, to industrialize and to export their higher carbon footprint manufactured products to the United States. So the idea of a border carbon adjustment, I think, has some resonance, has some attractiveness to the left and the right. And I think it could really help us reshape the trade debate for the 21st century, particularly if it does actually enjoy the sort of broad and robust business support as well as labor support that previous international trade deals have lacked.
Excellent. Thank you so much. As you noted, China, and everyone else knows this, is the world's largest contributing country to CO2 emissions, now producing over 10 billion metric tons of CO2. And the U.S. has recently promised to try to reduce our own emissions from 40 to 43% by 2030. And it's just interesting to think, especially as countries prepare for Glasgow this November, what are some of those market-based, and as Mark said earlier, common ground solutions out there? So I think this certainly helps put that in perspective. Senator, if I could just ask one other final question, or two questions actually, about, we talked about some of the bipartisan work and support, but would be curious to know, are there any disagreements and how we're going to overcome them?
It's a group of senators, there's disagreements on everything. So Julia, if I could, about Glasgow in particular. 5 years ago, I went to the Paris, the COP21 conference, at which the Paris Climate Accord was announced and signed, finalized. And one of the things that was distressing to me was that there were dueling delegations from the Senate. There was a group of Republicans who were doing press conferences and meetings saying this is unnecessary, this is a hoax, this is a waste, climate change isn't real, or it will impose too high of a cost on our economy and restrain our growth. And a delegation of Democrats who were saying, we're here to support the Obama administration. We were doing events with Energy Secretary Moniz and talking about a clean energy deployment and how we could win the 21st century and the race to renewables. My hope is that in partnership with Senator Braun and other members of the Climate Solutions Caucus, that we will have a bipartisan delegation at Glasgow in the fall. We will not agree on everything. We have not voted for all the same things. Not every Republican in the Climate Solutions Caucus is going to vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill that I believe will be voted out of the Senate this week. And I don't certainly support everything that they'd like to see happen in terms of regulatory reform, for example. But we have enough of a common agreement that I think it's entirely possible that we can be traveling to the United Kingdom together and to represent the Senate and this caucus in Scotland in a constructive way. One of the most interesting parts about being in Paris 5 years ago to me was a series of bilateral meetings we had with other countries and with legislators or elected leaders from other countries. The world is eager to hear whether or not after January 6th and after the previous presidency, whether in the United States we can come together and agree on anything. And one of the things that I believe is holding back a boldness by some of our allies and partners in climate is that they're concerned that whatever commitments are made by the Biden administration may simply be reversed if there is a next Republican majority in the Senate or a Republican president. I think it's important that we send a message that all of you heard at the outset here from Senator Braun, that there is change coming. There's change in the business community, there's change in the faith community, and there's certainly change in the Republican Party and in the Senate because of our Climate Solutions Caucus.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I guess I'll just leave it at, is there any advice you'd give? We've got a lot of participants today with diverse backgrounds in academia and business, think tanks and so forth. Any advice that we could look forward to in the future on the horizon?
Well, Julia, thank you for facilitating, and to Mark and to Randy, thank you for bringing us all together, to Randy and the Atlantic Council in particular for organizing this and for giving us a platform for this conversation. I too have to run to cast my next vote on the floor. If I could give some closing advice, it would be to engage, to recognize that there's a widespread movement among young conservative Americans who either because of their faith or because of their scientific analysis or because of their generational view or just because of the simple painful evidence of widespread wildfires and tornadoes, hurricanes and droughts has convinced them that our climate is changing. We need to remain optimistic. We have to remain engaged, and we have to prove to the world that the model of democracy that has so long been at the very core of who we are and what we do in the United States can deliver solutions to climate change. The average American, the average global citizen is convinced that there is such gridlock on this issue in our country that the best you can hope for is that New York or California will lead the way in adopting new technologies or in changing their laws. That's not true. We can and should act federally as well, and with an administration as ambitious on climate as the Biden-Harris administration, we in Congress need to step up and do our part. So I'd urge those who are watching today to be good partners, to be optimistic, but to press continuously for action by both parties to address this most critical, most pressing challenge facing our world and our species. Thank you very much, and thanks for a chance to be on with you today.
Thank you, Senator, so much. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Randy for conclusion.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Senator Coons, and thank you, Senator Braun, who's back at the markup. Really, Senator Coons, what a remarkable call to action. I really hope everyone listening in today, watching today, takes that to heart and continues to push to make progress on climate. This is a bipartisan movement that we can continue to work on together. We're really grateful to everyone who's carved out time today to join this important conversation. And thank you, of course, to Mark for your really great opening remarks and for Uniper's really remarkable effort as a business to push forward on climate action. And of course, thank you for support for the Transition Trailblazers series. Please, everyone, look out for more of these coming soon. I also want to thank everyone who made today's event possible: Lauren Holland, T. Frew, Jackson Styron, and Olga Kokova. The presentation is available on the Atlantic Council website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So please make sure to share it with your colleagues. I also want to let you know that you can get a chance to see more of Senator Braun joining today, the Atlantic Council at 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time as part of our 2021 Veterans Advanced Energy Week, which is an interactive virtual learning and networking experience dedicated to veterans, reservists, and military spouses working to strengthen U.S. national security through careers in the advanced energy industry. You can find the full agenda to the Veterans Advanced Energy Week and the link to register on the Atlantic Council website. So we hope to see many of you at these Veterans Advanced Energy events, including Senator Braun, again, at 3:15 Eastern today. Thank you, everyone, again, for joining us. Hugely appreciate seeing you here virtually and hope to see you perhaps in person again soon. Have a good afternoon.